The man in the white linen jacket had been copying every move my partner made for 9 minutes before he reached up and flicked the chin strap on the boy's bearskin. And I want you to understand something about those 9 minutes, because the law that ended his afternoon was written inside them. I stood 3 feet to Trooper Calder's left, on the cold flank of the forecourt at Wansford Court, and I watched a grown man teach a crowd that a sentry is a toy you are allowed to wind up. He was good at it. That was the worst part, a clumsy fool you forget by lunch. This one had timing. He had come off the morning coach with the rest of them, 50 or 60 visitors fanned along the gilded rope, phones already up, and at first he was just another face. Then Calder shifted his weight, the small, legal stir we make every few minutes so the blood keeps moving and a young soldier does not fold in the heat. And the man in linen shifted his weight too, exactly, a half-second behind, like a shadow that had decided to perform. A girl near him laughed. He heard the laugh the way a dry field hears a match. After that he did not stop. When Calder's chin lifted a half-degree, the man's chin lifted. When Calder's gloved hand settled on the rifle, the man cupped an invisible rifle and settled an invisible hand. He mirrored the stand, the stare, the slow ceremonial blink, and he did it with his back to the boy so the crowd could read his face and not Calder's, which is the oldest trick a clown knows. You make the still man the straight man and yourself the show. The phones drank it. I watched the little red dots multiply along the rope, 1 camera becoming 5 becoming 20, and I felt the afternoon tilt the way it does just before something you cannot take back. My name is Sergeant by Courtesy Owen Rask, though that day I stood as a guardsman like any other, 2nd sentry on the south face, 12 years in the regiment and most of them spent learning the one thing nobody outside the wall believes, that the hardest order we are ever given is to do nothing, and to do it perfectly, while a man works to make us move. Calder was 20. It was his 11th week on the public post. I had stood beside better and I had stood beside worse, but I had rarely stood beside anyone holding as clean a line as that boy held, while a stranger turned him into a puppet show. "He's not even real," the man in linen announced to the rope and dropped his jaw into a slack, stupid gape, eyes crossed, a marionette with cut strings. "See, wind him up, off he goes. Look at it, it's a coat with a man inside and the man's gone to sleep." He snapped his fingers an inch from Calder's nose. The boy did not blink. The crowd loved that he did not blink, and the man hated it, and I saw him understand in the same instant that the stillness was beating him in front of his audience, and that he would have to climb to win. That is the moment, if you have never stood a public post, that you learn to dread. Not the first joke. The climb. A man who is losing to a wall does not walk away from the wall, he leans harder. I have watched it 100 times from this exact patch of stone, and it always goes the same direction up the ladder, rung by rung, from words to gestures to the first small touch, each one testing whether anyone with authority is going to come and make him stop, and finding again and again that no one does. Because we are the ones with authority on that line, and our orders forbid us to move for an insult. So the ladder has no top. The climber decides where it ends. And he decides it by going 1 rung too high. I keyed nothing yet. There was nothing to key. An ass making faces is not a matter for the guardroom. If we turned out the relief for every man who pulled a face, we would never stand a post at all. The discipline is to read the ladder and to know the rung where mockery becomes a hand, and to be ready, fully, quietly ready, the way a drawn breath is ready without spending the readiness 1 second early. I watched his hands. In this work you watch the hands. The mouth tells you nothing. The hands tell you everything. "Maybe he's broken," the man said, and pretended to look for a switch on Calder's belt, miming a search, patting the air around the boy's hip while the crowd tittered, and a few of them, to their credit, had stopped laughing and begun to look at their shoes. "Where's the off button? There has to be an off button. You can't just leave it running." He leaned in until his nose was a hand's width from Calder's, and he mimicked the boy's level, forward stare back into the boy's own eyes, a face copying the face that would not copy back. "Blink," he whispered. "Go on, one blink for the people." Calder gave him the regiment's oldest gift, which is nothing at all. I have been asked since by the inquiry, by my own officer, by a reporter who did not understand the answer and printed it wrong, why I let it run that long, why I did not step in at the snapped fingers or the search for the switch or the whispered blink. And the honest answer, the one that does not make a clean headline, is this: a guardsman who breaks his post for an insult hands the insult its victory and hands the law its excuse. The instant I move for a joke, I am the one who moved. The clip ends there, on the soldier abandoning his stand, and the man in linen wins the only thing he came for. Our strength on that line is that we do not give them the picture they came to take. So you hold. You hold past the point where every nerve in your body is begging you to put a stop to it, and you hold for the simplest, hardest reason in the world. Because the moment you stop holding is the moment he wins, unless he climbs one rung higher and lays a hand on you, and then it is no longer a joke. Then it is the law's business, and the law is patient, and the law remembers who touched whom first. So I watched his hands, and I waited for the rung, and I prayed a guardsman's flat, practical prayer, that the boy beside me would hold the line until the man in linen made the mistake that all of them, sooner or later, make. He made it 11 minutes in. He had run out of faces. The crowd's laughter had thinned to the embarrassed kind, the kind that turns on the comedian, and he could feel it going, and he did what they all do when the room slips. He reached for the one thing left that was guaranteed to land. He stopped miming the boy. He touched him. It started small, almost gentle, which is how these things always start. He reached up with one finger and flicked the brass chin strap that ran beneath Calder's jaw, a light, contemptuous flick, the way you'd flick a bug off a windowsill, and the strap clicked against the boy's chin, and the crowd made a single, low sound, half a gasp and half a laugh, and the man in linen grinned because he had finally gotten a reaction out of the wall. Except the reaction had not come from Calder. It had come from me. Not a step, not a word, just a turn of my head, a slow and deliberate quarter turn so that my eyes came off my own front and settled on the man in linen, full and flat and unhurried, the way a door swings when a heavier weight has leaned against it. It was not a threat. We are not permitted threats, and I did not want one. It was a fact delivered in the only language the post allows. I have seen you. The whole of me said it. The man felt it land. His grin faltered for the first time in 11 minutes, and his eyes flicked sideways to me, and then back to Calder, and I watched him do the arithmetic that every climber does at the top of the ladder. Am I still funny? Or have I become the thing people remember for the wrong reason? And I watched him refuse the answer, because refusing it was easier than climbing down in front of a crowd that had come to watch him win. "Oh, this one's awake," he said, jerking a thumb at me, playing it for the rope, but the laugh he wanted did not come. The mood had turned under his feet, and he could feel the cold of it. A man with any sense reads that cold and goes to find his coach. The man in linen had spent his sense an hour ago, so he did the thing that turned the whole afternoon from a nuisance into a charge. He decided that if the strap had not been enough, he would aim higher, at the part of the uniform that even a clown half understands you are not to touch. He reached for the medals. Calder wore 3 on the left breast, modest things, a coronation issue, a long service marker the boy had not yet fully earned but stood entitled to wear on the public post, and a regimental device on a striped ribbon that meant more to him, I knew, than the other 2 combined, because his grandfather had stood this same forecourt under the same device, and the boy had asked specifically to be posted here for that reason. The medals are not decoration. I want that understood, because the man in linen plainly thought they were. They are a man's record carried on his chest where the world can see it. To flick a soldier's medals is not to flick metal. It is to backhand his service across the face in public for laughs. He did it with 2 fingers. He flicked the lowest metal so that it swung on its ribbon and clicked against the one above it, a little tinkling sound, and he said, "I heard it, the inquiry has it, 6 cameras have it, ding, ding, toys for a toy soldier. Are these even real? Did you buy these in the gift shop, soldier? Bet you bought these in the..." And on the second flick, his knuckles grazed the boy's jaw. It was not a punch. I will say that plainly, and I said it plainly to the inquiry, because I will not paint a thing larger than it was. The regiment does not need the lie, and the law did not require it. It was the back of 2 fingers, dragging up off the metal and catching Calder along the line of the jaw as the man's hand rose for a third flick he never landed. A grown man, uninvited, had put his hand on a soldier's face. That is the whole of it, and the whole of it is enough, because the law of the land does not measure the force of a touch laid on another man without his leave. It measures that the touch was laid at all, and that it was unwanted, and that it was deliberate. The strap was rude. The medals were ugly. The hand on the jaw was a crime, and it was a crime the instant it happened, and every camera on that rope had just recorded its own small piece of the proof. Calder did not flinch. I need you to hold both of these true at once, because the whole meaning of the day lives in the gap between them. A man struck the boy across the jaw, and the boy did not move. 20 years old, 11 weeks on the post, a stranger's knuckles dragging across his face in front of 100 phones, and Trooper Calder held his front and his stare and his stillness as if the air itself had brushed him. I have stood beside men twice his age who would not have held that. I felt something in my chest that was not quite pride and not quite grief, the thing you feel watching the young do the hard thing better than you taught them to. But the law had changed in that half-second, and so had my orders, and so I moved. There is a step we are trained to make and almost never make, and it is not a lunge and it is not a strike. It is the present, the rifle brought up and across the body, the heels brought together, the whole soldier squared from a posture of waiting into a posture of presence. And it is the single loudest legal thing a sentry on a public post can do without leaving his ground or laying a finger on a living soul. I brought my rifle to the present. The motion is sharp, and it is meant to be sharp. It cracks the air. It is the sound of a wall deciding to be a wall out loud. On the south face of Wansford Court, that crack does one more thing the visitors never know about. It trips a contact wired into the guardroom, and inside, on a board no tourist ever sees, a light goes amber and a corporal's head comes up. The man in linen jumped a clear inch off the cobbles. The whole rope jumped. The crack of a present arms from a soldier 18 inches from your face is not a thing the human body can stand still for, and the man in linen, who had spent 11 minutes proving the boy was a switched-off toy, discovered in one heartbeat which of the two of them was the machine and which was the meat. He stumbled back into the rope. A woman behind him caught his elbow. His phone, he had been holding one the whole time, filming his own act. The vanity that would later hang him clattered onto the stones, and the screen went on filming the gray sky, and the crowd's laughter, what was left of it, died all the way out. I did not speak. We do not speak on the post unless we must, and I did not have to. The present said everything. The joke is over. A soldier has been struck. The matter is now larger than you, and the men whose business it is are already coming. I held the present and I held the man in my eyes, and I let the silence do the work that 100 shouted words could not have done. Behind me, beyond the high black gate, I heard the guardroom door open. Boots. Unhurried boots, which are the worst kind for a man who has just done something he cannot undo, because hurry would mean panic, and panic he could argue with. Unhurried means certainty. Unhurried means the system has seen, and the system is not in a rush, because the system already knows how this ends. It was a joke, the man in linen said to no one, to the rope, to the gate, his voice climbing into the register men find when the ground has gone out from under them. It was just a joke. Everyone could see it was a joke. He's not even, I barely, it was a joke. Nobody on the rope said a word. They had laughed with him 11 minutes ago. Not one of them laughed now. And that, more than the boots, more than the crack of the present, more than the amber light he could not see, was the moment the man in linen understood that the crowd he had borrowed was gone, and that he was standing alone on a famous stretch of stone with 2 soldiers, 100 cameras, and a thing he had done that the morning could not be talked back into being a joke. The corporal came through the gate at a walk. Corporal Hale, 22 years a guardsman and built like the gate itself, came across the forecourt with a relief at his shoulder and stopped a respectful distance from the rope, because the rope is the line, and we do not cross it for show any more than we cross it for fun. He did not look at the man in linen. That is a thing the regiment teaches, and a thing the public never expects, that the first care of the corporal who comes to a struck sentry is not the offender at all. The offender is going nowhere. The constabulary will see to him. He is, from the moment he laid his hand on the boy, simply a problem being processed. The first care is the soldier. "Trooper Calder," Hale said, low and level, "pitch for the boy and not for the rope. Are you fit to stand your post?" "Yes, Corporal." The boy's voice did not shake. "I have heard a great many men say yes, Corporal, in my years, and I can tell you the difference between the yes that is true and the yes that is a wall the man has put up to keep from coming apart, and this was the true one." The hand across his jaw had not reached him. The mockery had not reached him. He had stood inside the thing the way we are taught to stand, and he was fit, and he meant it. "Good lad," Hale said, which from Hale is a medal in itself. Then, and only then, he turned his attention to the rope, and he raised his voice just enough to carry, and he spoke to the crowd in the flat, courteous, unanswerable tone of a man reading out a fact of weather. "Ladies and gentlemen, this gentleman has assaulted a soldier of the guard on duty. The matter is now with the constabulary. We would ask you to remain where you are if you witnessed it, and to keep your recordings as they may be required. Thank you for your patience." The word assaulted went through the rope like cold water. You could see it reach them one by one, see the faces that had laughed 11 minutes ago turn in real time from the memory of the laugh to the meaning of the word. Assaulted, not heckled, not annoyed. Assaulted. The man in linen heard it too, and the climb in his voice broke into a scramble. That's a lie. I didn't assault anyone. I tapped his medal. You can't. It's a public space. I'm allowed to." He turned to the rope, hunting for the audience that had been his a quarter of an hour ago. "You saw it. Tell them. It was a bit. It was content. He didn't even move. Look at him. He's fine. He didn't even." "That is rather the point, sir," Hale said. "I have thought about that line a great deal since." Hale did not raise his voice for it, and he did not say it to be clever. He said it because it was the truest thing standing on that forecourt, and the man in linen needed to hear it before the constabulary arrived to write down a colder version. That is rather the point. The boy did not move. The boy could not move, not for an insult, not for a touch, not for a hand dragged across his jaw, because the post forbids it, and because he had the discipline to obey the post when every reason on earth said hit back. The man in linen had built his entire 11-minute act on the boy's stillness, had mocked the boy for the very stillness that was, at that moment, the only thing keeping the man from a far worse morning. He had treated a soldier's iron control as proof the soldier was a toy. He had it exactly backward. The stillness was not the absence of a man. The stillness was the man holding. 2 constables came in through the side gate within the quarter hour. A kingdom moves quickly when a soldier of the guard is struck on a public post, and the call had gone out the moment the amber light came up. They were unhurried, like Hale, like the boots, and their being unhurried did more to the man in linen than handcuffs would have. He talked the whole time. They let him. A man who talks himself in circles in front of 6 cameras is doing the prosecution's work for it, and they knew that. And so they took his name, and they took the names of the witnesses on the rope, and they collected, one by one, with great courtesy, the recordings, including, when they finally turned it face up, the man's own phone, which had filmed 11 minutes of his act from his own chosen angle, and then filmed the gray sky for a quarter of an hour, and which contained, somewhere in the middle, 2 fingers flicking a soldier's medals and grazing a soldier's jaw, shot by the offender himself, in the offender's own hand, with the offender's own commentary running over it. He had made the case against himself, and then carried it in his pocket. Through all of it, Calder stood his post. That is the detail the inquiry kept returning to, and the detail the man in linen could never get his mind around. The boy did not come off the line to watch his attacker be taken. He did not gloat, did not glance, did not so much as let his eyes travel. He held his front and his stare and his stillness while the thing resolved itself 8 feet away, because the relief had not yet formally taken his post, and until it did the post was his, and the post does not care what is happening 8 feet to its left. I relieved him myself when the formalities allowed it, marched him off in good order, and only in the cool dark of the guardroom passage, out of every camera in the kingdom, did I see the cost of it, the small tremor in the boy's hands as he set his rifle in the rack, the long breath he had not been able to take for 19 minutes. The restraint is not free. It never is. The crowd sees the stillness and thinks it is easy because it looks like nothing. It is the most expensive nothing a man ever does, and we pay for it in private after, where it cannot be filmed. "Did I do it right, Sergeant?" Calder asked me in the passage, and there was the 20-year-old in it at last, the boy under the bearskin who had just stood through the worst 19 minutes of his short service and needed to hear from an older man that he had not failed. "You did it perfectly," I told him, and it was not comfort. It was the assessment. He hit you in the face and you held the line. There is not a man in this regiment who'd have done it cleaner. I wanted to, he stopped, looked at his own hands. For a second when he touched the medals, I wanted to break his arm. "I know. Why didn't I?" "Because you're a guardsman," I said, "and the second you touched him, he'd have one. He came here for one picture, a soldier losing his head. You never gave it to him. So now the only picture anyone has is the truth." I put my hand on his shoulder, which we do not often do. "Let the law have him, son. The law's better at it than your fist would have been, and it lasts longer. What the law did with him is the rest of this story, and it is worth the telling, because it is not the part most people imagine. The first thing that happened was that the man in linen got online before we did, and for about a day and a half he won. His friends, for he had not come alone, I learned later. There had been 2 of them on the rope, filming him from a flattering distance, which is its own small confession, cut a clip and posted it that same evening, and the clip was a masterpiece of leaving things out. It began the instant my rifle came to the present. Not one frame of the 11 minutes of mockery, not the strap, not the medals, not the flick across the jaw. It began with the crack and the man in linen flinching back into the rope, and over the top of it ran a caption that turned the whole afternoon upside down. A poor harmless tourist, minding his own business, terrified out of his wits by an aggressive armed soldier who lunged at him over nothing. They had even slowed the footage so the present looked like a lunge, and the man's stumble looked like a man fleeing for his life. It went everywhere. I will not pretend it did not sting. For about a day and a half, Trooper Calder, who had stood like a saint while a stranger backhanded his service across his face, was, to a great many strangers on a great many screens, the villain of the piece. The brute in the bearskin who couldn't take a joke and went for a tourist with a rifle. The regiment does not answer such things. We are not permitted to, and even if we were, we would not, because to wrestle a lie in the mud is to agree to be muddy, and a guardsman's whole worth is that he will not. So we said nothing, we let it run. And I will be honest with you that the saying nothing was harder for me than the standing still had been for the boy. Because it is one thing to hold your line when you are wronged, and another to hold it while the wrong gets 60,000 shares before breakfast. What I had learned in 12 years, though, and what the man in linen had not, is that the lie runs faster than the truth, but the truth runs longer. And on a public forecourt, the truth has more witnesses than any liar can edit out. Because the clip began at the present arms, every honest person who watched it and had been there, and there had been 100 knew at once that something was missing. You do not crack a present arms at a man for standing on a rope. Something came before. And one by one, the people on that rope who had filmed the whole thing, not the man's flattering friends, but the strangers behind them, the ones whose phones had been pointed the entire 11 minutes at the curious sight of a man making a fool of a sentry, began to post what they had. A schoolteacher from up the coast posted the full 9 minutes of mimicry. A pair of visitors posted the strap flick from a side angle that the man's own forward-facing friends could never have caught. And a quiet older gentleman who had said not a word on the rope turned out to have been filming in steady, unhurried close-up, the 2 fingers flicking the metals and the knuckles dragging up across the boy's jaw, the precise frame the edited clip had been built to bury, and he sent it, unprompted, not to the noise of the internet but to the constabulary with a short note. I was there. This is what happened. The young soldier did nothing. I thought you should have it from someone who saw. That is the part the man in linen never understood about the ground he chose. He came to a famous forecourt to borrow its eyes for his act, never grasping that the eyes were not his to borrow, that 100 strangers with 100 phones are not an audience, they are 100 witnesses, and the moment you do a real wrong in front of them, the very crowd you wanted becomes the case against you. He had filmed himself. His friends had filmed him. A teacher, 2 tourists, and a silent old man had filmed him. And bolted to the lamp standard above the south face, where it had hung since long before he was born, a fixed palace camera had filmed all of it in clean, time-stamped, uncut record from a height no editor could argue with. The truth caught up inside 2 days, and when it caught up it did not crawl, it arrived. The full footage spread wider than the lie had. It always does in the end, because a true thing has nothing to hide, and so it can show everything. And the same screens that had called Calder a brute now watched a grown man in a white jacket spend 11 minutes turning a 20-year-old into a puppet show, and then flick the metals off his chest and drag his knuckles across his face, while the boy stood like the stone he was accused of being. The mood turned the way the rope had turned, only larger. The man in linen took his clip down. It did not matter. Nothing you put on the internet was ever really yours to take back. The old gentleman's steady close-up had seen to that, and so had the lamp above the south face. And while the screens argued, the law, unhurried as ever, did its patient work. He was charged with assault, not with mockery. Mockery is no crime, and the regiment would be the last to ask the law to make it one, because a soldier who cannot stand to be laughed at has no business on a public post. He was not charged for the 9 minutes of faces, or the snapped fingers, or the search for the off button, or the whispered blink. He was charged for the one thing he did that crossed from rudeness into the law's plain ground, the deliberate, uninvited hand laid on another man, the flick at the metals that became a touch on the jaw. The prosecutor did not need the edited clip, and did not need the argument, and did not need a single thing from the regiment beyond Calder's short, adjective-free statement of what was done to him. The prosecutor had the man's own phone, the old gentleman's close-up, the lamp camera, and 100 witnesses who had stopped laughing. It was, his own counsel must have told him, not a case to fight. It was a case to be sorry for as convincingly as possible and hope the sorrow counted. He pleaded guilty. He stood in a courtroom a long way in spirit from the forecourt where he had been so funny, and he was, the report says, very quiet, and he said through his counsel that he had not meant for it to go so far, that it had gotten away from him, that he was deeply ashamed, and I believe the shame was real, because shame usually is, once the crowd is gone and only the consequence is left. The magistrate did not need to lecture him. The footage had done that, the whole kingdom had done that. He was convicted of common assault. He was fined a sum that stung and bound over to keep the peace, and the part that I think reached him deepest, because it took from him the very thing he had come to take. He was barred from the forecourt and the ceremonial route of Wansford Court, formally and on the record. The famous stones he had crossed a sea to stand on turned into a place he was no longer permitted to be. He had come to borrow the fame of that ground for an afternoon. He left having lost the right to set foot on it for years. That was the law's answer, and it was a good one, and the regiment was content with it. But the law's answer is not the part of this I carry. The part I carry happened 3 weeks later, on the same south face, in a thin gray morning with the rope nearly empty, when an old man came alone to the line and stood a long while looking at Trooper Calder. I knew him before he spoke, because the boy had his face, the same long jaw, the same level eyes. The grandfather. He had stood this exact forecourt 40 years before under the same regimental device that hung now on the striped ribbon over Calder's heart, the lowest of the 3 medals, the one the man in linen had set swinging with his contemptuous little ding. The old man did not call out and did not try to catch the boy's eye, because he had stood the post himself, and he knew the rules of it better than any tourist ever would. He simply stood, an old soldier on the public side of the rope, and looked at a young one on the duty side, and let the looking be the whole of it. When the relief came and Calder was marched off, the old man was waiting in the lee of the gate, out of the wind, and I watched the 2 of them, because I had walked the boy off myself, and I will tell you what passed between them, because it is the truest thing in this whole account. The old man did not say well done. He did not mention the man in linen, or the clip, or the court, or the fine, or any of the noise that had filled 3 weeks. He reached up, Calder had bent, as you bend to a grandfather, and he laid one finger very gently on the lowest medal, the device, the one that had been flicked, not to mock it. To touch it the way you touch a thing you handed down and are glad to see still standing. And he said, he flicked this one. He did, Granda. And you didn't move. No, Granda. The old man was quiet a moment. Then he said the thing I have carried since, in a voice gone rough at the edges. Do you know what these are for? Not for being looked at. Any fool can wear a medal to be looked at. That linen fellow learned that, didn't he, the hard way. They're for the days nobody's watching and you hold the line anyway, because that's the day they were given for. You held the line on a day the whole world was watching, with a man's hand in your face. Lad, and here the old soldier's composure failed him for just a second, just one, before he gathered it back the way we are all taught to. Lad, you wore them right. That's all there is. You wore them right. I turned away then, because some things are not mine to watch, and gave them the wind and the gate and the gray morning to themselves. The boy was steadier after that. Not harder, steadier. He went on to be one of the finest sentries I have stood beside, and when, years on, they made me square away the young ones come fresh to the public post, the ones whose hands shake in the passage after, who ask me did I do it right with their eyes, I told them Calder's story, not the man in linens. I never spent much breath on the man in linen in the end. He got his fine and his bar and his quiet courtroom and his shame, and the law was patient and the law was enough, and I have honestly half forgotten his face, which I suspect would wound him more than the fine ever did. The mockery cost him everything and the man he mocked nothing, and that is the oldest arithmetic in this regiment, and it never comes out any other way. What I tell the young ones is this, and I will tell you the same, because it is the only thing worth taking from a story like ours. They will come, I tell them. Not every day, but they will come, the ones who think a soldier standing still is a soldier switched off, a coat with a sleeping man inside, a toy to be wound up for a crowd. They will mime you and snap their fingers in your face and hunt for your off button and tell the rope you're not even real. And the whole of your training, the whole of your worth, the entire reason the kingdom puts you on that famous stone in front of all those phones, comes down to one hard thing. You will not give them the picture. You will hold the line through the faces and the fingers and the whispered blink. You will hold it past the rung where every nerve you own is begging you to make it stop, and you will hold it for the plainest reason there is, that the strength of this regiment was never that we cannot be touched. We can be touched. A foolish man proved it, on a gray afternoon, with 2 fingers and a flick. The strength of this regiment is that, when we are touched, we do not break, and the not breaking is louder than any blow we could ever land, and it lasts longer, and it is the only kind of victory that does not have to be defended in the morning. The man in linen wanted, more than anything in the world, to make a soldier move. He stood on the most famous stones in the kingdom, and he gave it everything he had: 11 minutes, 100 cameras, a flick strap, a hand across the face, and he could not do it. He could not move a 20-year-old boy on his 11th week. He moved himself in the end, all the way into a courtroom and out the far side of the only ground he'd ever wanted to stand on. And the boy he could not move is standing his post still, somewhere this morning, with 3 medals on his chest and the lowest of them worn exactly right, under a sky that does not care who is watching, which is, his grandfather would tell you, the only sky a medal was ever truly meant for. I have stood that forecourt for 12 years. I have watched a great many people try to break a great many men, and I have learned that the ones who try the hardest are the ones who least understand what they are looking at. They see a man who will not move and they think they have found a weakness. They have found the strongest thing a man can be. A soldier who holds the line while the world flicks his medals and films his face and calls him a toy is not a toy, and is not asleep, and is not weak. He is the wall the rest of us get to stand behind, and the wonder of him is not that nothing reaches him. The wonder of him is that everything reaches him: the insult, the touch, the hand across the jaw, all of it, reaching all the way in, and he holds anyway and does not break and stays standing, so that the rest of us, watching, might remember what it looks like when a man is touched and does not fall. The man in linen never saw it. He stood 18 inches from it for 11 minutes and never once saw it. But the crowd saw it. The old gentleman with the steady camera saw it. The grandfather saw it and laid a finger on a medal and wept. And you, I think, can see it now. The man flicked the medals. The boy did not move. That is the whole of it, and it is enough, and it is the only thing I have ever known that the years cannot wear away.